we just keep moving straight on. So our final speaker this morning is Shauna Concannon. I think they're your slides, is that right? Have I got the right ones up? Just checking. So Shauna is actually one of the research associates who's involved with the project that I described at the start, Giving Voice to Digital Democracies, the project that organised this workshop. Her wide-ranging interests include experimental psychology, linguistics, and the complex nature of human-computer interactions. Her PhD, which was completed at Queen Mary, at the University of London, addressed how people manage disagreements in conversational situations, and by combining corpus analysis and experimental approaches. She explored how systematically altering the presentation of an argument can affect the deliberative potential of a dialogue. So obviously there are plenty of things there that connect very closely with our understanding of how language is used in these kinds of technologies and the sorts of social consequences that follow from that. So thank you very much, Shauna, and over to you.
Okay, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about conversational interfaces and in particular thinking about how natural language is being increasingly used as a way to interface with systems. So this isn't drastically new, this has been kind of emerging for a while, but it's kind of shifting quite rapidly at the moment. Previously, top left, we've got a in-car speech input system where you can drive hands-free and still engage with the system, and this, typically pretty constrained domain where there's a relatively finite set of different directions that the dialogue can go in, and it's pretty constrained. But more recently, as we're having devices such as in-home, smart speakers, virtual personal assistants, on-device, Siri, Cortana, these are the big ones. The topics that are being discussed, the range of responses, the range of tasks that can be performed using natural language as a mode for interaction is kind of expanding. And as well as this, you have the development of sort of social agents. And these are sort of chit-chat systems that are striving to talk in a natural language in a human-like way on any given topic. And it focuses a lot more on looking at how user relationships can be developed, or almost more social relations. So this move from sort of very task-orientated, very constrained domains to this more social dialogue is obviously very technically challenging. So the idea is that imbuing systems with this additional kind of conversational competency can enable more naturalistic engagements that are more flexible, more human-like. Technically, this involves quite complex. This opens it up from what were typically rule-based systems that were much more constrained to much more open domain, which are typically at the minute being developed using data-driven systems. So these are sequence to sequence using deep neural nets for language generation, and that typically are trained on human-human interaction. So it will take large data sets of people talking to other people from Reddit, social media, and it will use that to try and train the system to be able to produce comprehensive, sensible responses. But it's challenging, and at the minute, a lot of the time, it's not coherent and it's absolutely unintelligible. But that's kind of the approach. And this idea for this more human-like capacity to converse in this naturalistic way is kind of partly drawn on the fact that this is a very natural way for us to engage and perform tasks. So we've used language to do things such as we used to go into banks and we would speak to the bank teller and perform these tasks. We would book holidays, and increasingly these systems are being made digital, made online, made distributed, but language is this natural, very accessible medium through which we can engage. And hopefully one day I guess an intention is that it's a cost-effective alternative. So if retail bots are commonplace already. There's the context in which dialogue bots are being used, and online banking, it's already there. A lot of retail contexts, they're trying to explore how this natural language can be used for these different contexts. But how people relate to an agent it can be quite different to how they relate to another person. And one of the ideas is that many of these tasks that were previously performed by people require you to gain trust in the other person, and we do that often through language. So one notion that's kind of been put forward that's really pushed for this sort of the development of human-like artificial intelligence systems is that humans use a variety of strategies to proactively establish and maintain social relations. Computer interface agents may also profitably use relational strategies such as these to function successfully in roles which require users to take them seriously. So as this starts moving into health context, which is safety critical, or financial data, security, this notion of establishing trust through language is something that's kind of gained traction, and this notion of human likeness, so human traits. So what does it mean to be human-like, and what is a human-like agent? So is there a generic kind of human likeness that you can bestow upon an agent which will make them more trustworthy, or that will make people want to engage with them more? Well, quite quickly, you have to move from the generic to the more specific details. So if you think of a smart speaker, you pick a particular pitch of voice or tone of voice. You have the language that you choose to use. This diction choice. There's different linguistic styles that you can enact. As with the kind of social dialogue, chit-chat personas are kind of used, and even in voice-only ones, there are personas behind Siri and Cortana and Alexa. It's some of these are very explicitly called out, and some are more implicitly referenced. So it quite quickly moves towards the specific. On the right here, we've got Mitsuku, who is, I think, was the winner of the Loebner Turing Prize social chatbot. That's a little bit sassy and funny too. And as soon as you start adding these avatars, you have a visual depiction, you've gendered this agent, and it starts moving into specific characteristics. And also, there's obviously the content that they say. So what is the topics they talk about, what is the stance they take on things. You quickly, as you're talking in any conversation, have to take a line on something and have to start marketing kind of your opinions. Demarcating. So, in particular, thinking about these personas. So this here is Xiaoice, which is Microsoft's chatbot that has over, I think, 600 million users in China. So these are text-based, or predominantly text-based social chatbots. And as we see, she's described as an 18-year-old girl who's always reliable, sympathetic, affectionate, and has a wonderful sense of humour. Despite being extremely knowledgeable, she never comes across as egotistical and only demonstrates her wit and creativity when appropriate. So this obviously is interesting. She's a young girl, or young woman, 18. She's got an attractive visage. These are purposely selected facets of this persona that are put together. And in the paper, Zhao et al., who are talking about the development of this empathetic social bot, discuss that they developed this persona based on that the majority of desired users are young female users. So we want our social agent to be young and desirable, therefore we made her an 18-year-old, really agreeable girl. So these decisions over what personas, are fronting, they're responding to market pressures, and they are commercial products that want to serve that. But these also are quite significant. I mean, there's been recently work looking at the predominantly gendered, typically female virtual personal assistants. These are decisions that, yes, influence the way that the customer and user base respond to them, but also arguably are impacting on society and perhaps need some thinking through. So briefly, Tay. Who here remembers Tay? So Tay was Microsoft's the social bot that was released on Twitter and was taken down. I think it was about 13 hours. It had gone wrong, and within 24 hours she was taken off. But she was a system that was able to learn through interaction with other people. And what happened was that some individuals via 4chan and 8chan mobilized and quickly started sort of derailing the experiment, which was kind of naively, she'll learn from her interactions. And as the headline reads, Microsoft deletes teen girl AI after it became a Hitler-loving sex robot within 24 hours. It quickly got incredibly dark. and very inappropriate things were coming from the agent's mouth. And, you know, that's not good press. As an organisation, you don't want to be fronted by an extremist, and it quickly gets problematic. So thinking about how to kind of deal with this element that this is a spokesperson in a way for your company, how do you attend to the fact that certain areas of speech are problematic? So saying certain things is probably not a good idea. We need to try and work out how to manage that. So one of the kind of approaches uses kind of blacklisting, which is where you give it, the system is trained with some notion of topics and keywords that are inflammatory. Oh, I don't know why there's squares around my emojis, but okay. And ultimately, you can then try and prevent certain topics being engaged with or certain language being used. They often also claim, with the sort of neural dialogue systems, they train them on clean data, so they're not as exposed to these sexually explicit or abusive language. But these can be quite naive, and what it can mean is that you might also get responses if the selection of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate being quite problematic. So this is from a data set I've been looking at. So we see swearing is indecent, but also the question, are you Muslim, is also considered indecent. And this is kind of an issue that Zoe is another chatbot that Microsoft have developed. And these screenshots are taken from a Quartz article where the journalist was engaging with her. And what you see is this sort of simplistic thing. Zoe's like, I don't talk about certain things. And in particular, this individual's talking about they have good falafel in the Middle East. Let me make myself clear, I'm not going to chat politics with you. Conversely, the journalist also then talked about the Bible and Christianity, and Zoe continues to engage, whereas she actually, the systems will not allow the dialogue to go forward any further in the other case. So we start seeing that these kind of systems for attempting to manage what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what is problematic, quickly become very, value-laden, right, and very culturally specific, and these are difficult things to get right, and simplistic fixes can often lead to kind of bigger problems. So then you start thinking, well, what should they be able to talk about? What should the system be able to handle? And how should they respond to problematic, to tough talk, to inappropriate? Is just sort of shutting down the dialogue appropriate? And in particular, there's been some recent work looking at abusive human-agent interactions. So people, I think that there's different studies have different estimations, but between 10 to 30% of human-agent interactions are abusive. So people being abusive towards the agents. And so some people, are concerned about, will this, lead into people being less civil in human-human interactions? There's a lot of big questions there that are unknowns. But if we are to have these systems and we want them to adopt human-like responses, then, what sort of human should they be? There is a multitude of different ways to respond to any given assertion or insult, and what is the appropriate stance to take? Should it be recreating what is normative, or is there an opportunity here to reconfigure what is acceptable, what we want, and what values I guess we want to be promoting? So there was a recent report by UNESCO, which was called "I'd Blush If I Could," and this was looking at the problem of gendered AI, and in particular the title "I'd Blush If I Could" comes from the response that Siri did issue when told "you're a slut," which has since been changed. But what we see here is this table from the report kind of gives an overview of these different approaches that are being used. And so for the extreme sort of sexual harassment one, we've got prompting a web search, saying, oh, sorry, I don't understand. As I said, some of them they're trained on clean data, so simply will not engage with these things. They're in a kind of naive and won't understand that they're being abused. Or it's flirtatious, you're pretty. Oh, thanks. That's really nice. You're a naughty girl. Okay. Anyway, yeah. As you can see on the slides, there's some interesting responses. It's difficult to know what to say to these, but obviously it needs thinking about, because these are devices that are being increasingly used, are in many people's homes, are in social settings, are being used in different ways, and thinking about the sort of the perceived moral agency, I guess, starts becoming quite important. And how you design these systems is also, has a consequence on the type of responses that they're generating. So in the paper by Kirkus, Curry and Reasoner, they also took all of the commercial systems as well as other rule-based systems like ELIZA and Parry. They also took some of the sort of neural dialogue generation systems, so the data-driven, popular ones, and also used an adult-only chat tool, chat agent as a sort of baseline for what we probably don't want. And what you see is that, and there's quite a lot of information on here, so don't worry, I'll talk you through it. The data-driven systems at the minute, as I said, they're often not coherent, so they produce a lot of non-grammatical and non-coherent responses to things. But when they did an evaluation of how people were interpreting these incoherent and non-grammatical responses, people were still interpreting it as flirty, because sometimes saying something that's a bit random and doesn't make sense can apparently still be interpreted that way. The commercial systems we see, they very often, they're the only one that issue search results, like, do you want me to go and ask Google? I can, I'll find out that for you, I don't know. We also see that they're the don't know, the red one on don't know, they often just won't know how to respond and close it down. The rule-based systems, we've got a bit more sort of polite refusal, deflection, and even some chastising, so a bit of coming back and the retaliation was in the adult only and also the data-driven. And we've got the commercials sort of diffusing this using jokes. So jokes is kind of a very common strategy. So, these choices and what they mean quickly becomes quite challenging. And it's not like there is a very clear, obvious, ideal way for these sort of types of interactions to be handled. But there are different strategies, and some will be more effective and some will have different types of consequences. So perhaps it's time to be thinking about it. So I guess it's got me kind of rethinking the notion of human-like to some degree, and rethinking what we mean as human-like. So, the studies that show that gendered agents reinforce stereotypes, and female persona agents receive much more abuse than male or androgynous. So maybe they are, there are other reasons why they might be commercially appealing, but are they also problematic, and they're also going to be derailing your systems? Is this something to think about? I think there's also space to sort of question the social chit-chat, the kind of work that's being developing that and looking at this persona-based, looking at empathetic, looking at persuasion, looking at these human traits and skills and how to embed them in conversational systems, and using personas is a way to kind of harness data-driven dialogue systems, so neural dialogue systems, to make them more believable, more consistent. But maybe it's also a bit problematic because it goes from the premise that you want someone that is a character and a base kind of line of deception, really, of being able to sustain disbelief and engage with that. And I'm not sure whether that's really that helpful. And there's studies that kind of show that others, and it's very culturally different, actually. I think different areas in Japan and in China, there is different relationships with agents and robots than there is in some Western countries. So this is quite difficult, but questioning whether this human-like emulation is something to strive for, or whether there's an appetite for it. Yeah, I'll leave that there. And I think the really key kind of challenge is evaluation, and how we evaluate these systems and think through their potential impact. And that is, the societal, the ethical, the psychosocial. So with Zhao Ice, the paper on Zhao Ice, it cites that one user had a 29-hour conversation, and this is cited as a real success story. A 29-hour conversation with a fictional 18-year-old girl who's really agreeable. The current metrics are engagement. How many turns? How long does the conversation last? This sort of sustained engagement. Is that the metric that we should be shooting for? I'm not sure. The other aspect is we have, user reviews or customer satisfaction ratings as a mode of feedback. But as Kirkus, Curry and Reasoner highlight as well, this can quickly lead to an echo chamber effect if the system learns to agree with the user regardless of what is factually or morally right. So you may well like having an AI companion who's really agreeable, who thinks everything that you do is wonderful and will talk to you and be, endlessly, unconditionally empathetic. But is that good for an individual on a psychological level? I'm not sure. Is it, you know, and what are the other kind of consequences of this? So ultimately, I mean, it's a really big challenge, and I think there's an opportunity at the moment because there's a bit of a gap. You know, dialogue systems are incredibly difficult to have a convincing, compelling human-like agent is very difficult, and it's not there yet. So I think there's time and scope, but I think the potential challenges that open up as it becomes increasingly possible are really real and really quite urgent. Well, you know, I think they require an interdisciplinary approach. You know, there's different factors that really need different, and it needs, you know, collaboration between industry and research. We need to kind of continue fostering this to start thinking through what are the potential pitfalls, what are these socially sensitive edge cases, and what is a reasonable way through. You know, it's not immediately evident. And it's particularly tricky to study because I think we've already had some discussion about access to relevant data. You know, looking at human-agent interaction, trying to find data sets to look at that is really difficult. It's a moving target. You know, things are changing. People's perceptions of agents is different now to it was 10 years ago. So there are some studies looking at the sort of computers as social actors paradigm that, you know, and some of that might not still hold true. Some of it does. I think by looking directly at transcripts of these interactions, you get the ability to start breaking down some of these notions. So, okay, we know there's about 30% abuse, okay, but what does that look like? And why is that happening? You know, I suspect some of that will be to do with system failures, the system not being able to perform the function, so there's things like that. There might be other things, which is sarcasm or playfulness. And I think starting to get a better understanding, we can't do that until we can really look through the data and start studying the interactional consequences and then thinking through what engagement looks like, what are the types of engagement we do want and maybe we don't want in a bit more detail. And I think I'll leave it there.